They say the world is broken. Turn on the news and it's chaos. Look at the headlines: division, destruction, despair. The world throws fires at us every day: financial stress, emotional betrayal, moral confusion. And yet, there are people who walk through all of it calm, centered, grounded. People who seem unshakable not because life spares them, but because they've learned how to find peace in the storm. The real question isn't how to avoid the chaos, it's how to remain whole in the midst of it. We often confuse peace with comfort. We think we'll finally feel at peace when the workload lightens, when the bills are paid, when the people around us stop disappointing us. So we wait. We chase peace like it's a reward for having fixed everything. But peace isn't a reward, it's a decision. It doesn't come after the storm, it's built in the middle of it. And the people who seem calm no matter what are not lucky. They're not immune to difficulty. They've just stopped outsourcing their peace to a world they can't control. Peace begins with the choice to look inward before reacting outward. It's not found in a noise-free world, but in a mind that has learned how to be still. When you stop needing everything around you to align perfectly before you can breathe, you become powerful. You become unshakable. Because you've built the one thing chaos cannot touch: a calm heart in the midst of pressure. Think about the moments when life felt the most overwhelming. Most of the time, it wasn't because of what was happening, but because of how we were interpreting it. The mind ran wild. We projected worst-case scenarios. We became consumed by thoughts that weren't even real yet. This is how peace slips away, not because something bad happened, but because we let our attention run toward fear and away from presence. The truth is, the world will never be quiet. There will always be something to fear, something to fix, something to regret. But if we keep waiting for everything to be normal, we miss the chance to build resilience in the now. Peace is built in real time, not later. And the strongest people in the world have stopped trying to change every external factor. They've learned to master the internal space, their attention, their self-talk, their focus. This is where stillness comes in. Stillness isn't about sitting alone in a silent room. It's the ability to stay present in a noisy world. It's learning to slow down the racing thoughts and reconnect to the values that matter. Stillness gives clarity, clarity gives confidence, and confidence breeds calm. Without stillness, our reactions are scattered. With it, our responses become thoughtful, centered, strategic. Stillness is the skill of pulling away from the chaos long enough to see clearly. And it's not something we do once. It's a daily rhythm. Like breathing, it must be consistent. The mind left unmanaged doesn't get quieter, it gets louder. That's why people who seem most at peace usually have intentional rituals. Time to reflect, walk, write, think. These moments aren't luxuries, they are lifelines. They help us return to ourselves before we lose ourselves in the noise of the world. The difference between peace and panic is usually one thing: space. Space to pause before reacting, space to think before deciding, space to remind ourselves of who we are before letting emotions decide for us. Without that space, the mind gets hijacked. We become driven by whatever is loudest, most urgent, most emotional. But when we create space, we create power, we create perspective, and in that perspective, peace returns. What's powerful about peace is that it can exist in the same place as pressure. You can be in the middle of a crisis and still choose how you want to show up. You can be surrounded by negativity and still maintain your integrity. You can experience loss and still stay anchored in gratitude. This isn't denial, it's discipline. It's a trained mind that says, I won't let this define me. I will lead myself through it. That kind of strength isn't loud, it doesn't need to make declarations. It just shows up consistently. People who live this way don't avoid emotion, they've just learned not to worship it. They feel deeply, but act wisely. They listen to their feelings, but follow their values. This is the foundation of an unshakable mindset. Not suppressing what's hard, but building something deeper than what's hard can shake. One of the myths about peace is that it's passive, that calm people have simply tuned out the world. But the opposite is true. Peaceful people are the most engaged. They're the most emotionally intelligent. They care deeply, but they've learned how to protect their energy so they can give without losing themselves. They don't numb out, they lean in. But they do so from a place of grounded presence rather than emotional overload. Stillness teaches you to hold both truths. Things can be broken, and you can still be whole. The world can be chaotic, and you can still be focused. The system can be unfair, and you can still act with dignity. These aren't contradictions, they are choices. And each time you choose to remain still rather than spiral, you build something indestructible. You build self-leadership. We often look for peace in outcomes. We think if we get the job, the approval, the resolution, then we'll feel calm. But outcomes don't guarantee peace. Perspective does. Because what one person sees as a disaster, another sees as a challenge. What one sees as personal, another sees as neutral. The difference is not the event. It's the lens through which it's viewed. And that lens is shaped by stillness. When you build a habit of stillness, you become less reactive. You start to observe without immediate judgment. You give space between the trigger and the response. That space is where your power lives. It's where wisdom lives. It's where emotional freedom lives. Without it, you become a prisoner of every circumstance. With it, you become the leader of your inner world. No one is born peaceful. It's cultivated, slowly, through moments of reflection, through habits of focus, through the courage to stop and feel instead of rushing to escape. And once it's built, it becomes a refuge you can return to again and again. You can walk into the same broken world, the same chaotic system, the same uncertain future, but you walk in different because you've changed the one thing that changes everything, your relationship with your mind. The world will continue to pull at you. There will always be another conflict, another fear, another challenge. But with a strong foundation of internal peace, you stop breaking every time something outside breaks. You start holding your shape. And in that strength, you not only survive the storm, you become the calm in it. Solitude is not loneliness. It's not isolation. It's not the absence of people. It's the presence of self. In a world addicted to noise, constant interaction, and external validation, solitude can feel uncomfortable at first. But that discomfort is the doorway. On the other side of it is clarity, resilience, and a kind of strength that can't be borrowed or built in crowds. People often misunderstand solitude because they associate being alone with being empty. But the truth is, being alone is where you fill yourself up. It's where distractions fall away and the voice inside you becomes loud enough to hear. Not the voice of fear or doubt, the deeper voice, the one that remembers what matters, what you believe in, what you're capable of. When life gets loud, solitude is the place you return to so you don't lose yourself in the noise. Solitude builds self-reliance. When you can sit with your own thoughts and not run from them, you begin to see what's real and what's just reaction. You no longer need someone else to tell you what to think or feel. You learn to separate signal from noise. And in that process, you build emotional muscles most people never touch. The muscle of discernment, the muscle of inner direction, the ability to stand firm even when others don't understand. In solitude, you face things you've been avoiding, that conversation you've been putting off with yourself, that emotion you've buried under busy schedules, that dream you've dismissed because it felt too big. You sit with all of it, not to judge it, but to understand it. This is how growth happens, not in the rush of constant doing, but in the quiet of deep reflection. The greatest breakthroughs don't come in crowded rooms. They come when you're walking alone, sitting in silence, or journaling your way through confusion. Solitude becomes a meeting ground between who you are and who you're becoming. And if you meet yourself there often enough, you start to carry a different presence, one that doesn't need noise to feel alive, one that doesn't need applause to know it's on the right track. There's something unexplainably powerful about people who are comfortable in their own company. They walk differently, speak differently, make decisions from a grounded place, because they're not driven by the need to please everyone. They've done the work of asking themselves what they value, what they want, and how they wish to live. So they don't drift, they choose. And they lead, not just others, but first and foremost, themselves. Self-leadership begins with solitude. Before anyone else follows you, you must be able to follow yourself. That means knowing when to pause, knowing when to pull back, knowing how to reset, rethink, and realign. The world celebrates constant motion, but wisdom lives in the pause before speaking, the pause before reacting, the pause that makes space for a better choice. Too many people are running from one thing to another, not because they're clear, but because they're afraid of what stillness might reveal. Solitude exposes. It brings up the parts of us that are unfinished. But that exposure is a gift. You can't heal what you won't look at, and you can't become who you're meant to be if you never take the time to confront who you are right now. And once that self-leadership is built, everything changes. You stop waiting for someone else to give you permission. You stop outsourcing your emotional well-being. You take ownership of your mindset, your habits, your direction. You realize that no one else is responsible for the tone you carry into a room, the attitude you bring to adversity, or the energy you choose to embody when life gets hard. Those who are unshakable don't try to control everything. They master the one thing they can, themselves. They lead from a deep internal clarity, not just surface-level confidence. And that kind of leadership isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It speaks through action, presence, consistency. It doesn't demand attention. It earns trust. Self-leadership is the ability to show up for yourself even when no one is watching. It's brushing off excuses and doing what needs to be done because it aligns with your purpose. It's choosing discipline over distraction, courage over comfort. It's asking yourself better questions. Am I proud of how I handled that? Is this decision reflective of who I want to be? What needs to change so I don't betray my values next time? When someone lacks self-leadership, it shows. Their peace is fragile. Their emotions rule them. They depend on circumstances for their mood and other people for their validation. But when someone leads themselves well, you feel it. Their presence is calm, not because life is easy, but because they've chosen who they want to be and they stick to it, regardless of how the world behaves. Leadership without self-leadership is manipulation. Influence without integrity is empty. If you want to make a difference, you start by making decisions in private that reflect the values you hope to share in public. That's how trust is built. That's how alignment is sustained. And it's how you become someone who doesn't break every time things fall apart. The world will always test you, not just with obvious challenges, but in subtle ways. In the temptation to compromise your values for convenience, in the pressure to be liked instead of being honest. in the chaos that invites you to react instead of respond. Self-leadership is the armor against those tests. It's the habit of showing up the same, whether the world applauds you or criticizes you, whether the path is smooth or messy, whether you're seen or unseen. This is how peace is protected, not by eliminating difficulty, but by building someone strong enough to carry peace through difficulty. Solitude builds that person. Self-leadership sustains them. These two practices, being alone with intention and leading yourself with conviction, are what separate those who thrive from those who merely survive. The most powerful presence in the room is the one that doesn't need the room, because it has spent enough time in solitude to know who it is, and it has practiced enough self-leadership to act with integrity under pressure. When these qualities come together, something rare happens. You stop reacting to the world, and you start responding from within. And when enough people live this way, grounded, self-led, and clear, then peace becomes contagious, not because the world changes, but because people do. And the ripple begins not in a crowd, but in one person who chose to be alone long enough to find clarity and strong enough to carry it back into the world. There's a misconception that strength looks like being unaffected, that it means being so tough nothing ever touches you. But true strength doesn't come from pretending. It comes from understanding, especially emotional understanding. The most powerful people are not those who suppress their emotions, but those who've learned how to interpret them, manage them, and channel them wisely. Emotional regulation is not about shutting down what we feel. It's about gaining control over how we respond to what we feel. Emotions are messengers. They are data. When fear shows up, it's often trying to protect us. When anger rises, it's highlighting something that matters deeply. When sadness appears, it points us toward what we value. But when we don't understand what these emotions are trying to say, we either ignore them or let them explode. The goal is neither suppression nor explosion. The goal is regulation. And that begins with awareness. Most people go through life unaware of how emotion is shaping their behavior. They snap at others without realizing they're actually afraid. They shut down conversations without understanding that discomfort is driving them. They retreat not because they're disinterested, but because vulnerability is unfamiliar. Without emotional awareness, we become reactive. We become unpredictable, and often we become destructive to ourselves and to others. Regulating emotion is a skill. Like any skill, it can be trained. It starts by slowing down, giving ourselves permission to pause when we feel triggered, not to deny the feeling, but to create enough space between stimulus and response to ask a better question. What am I really feeling right now? Where is this coming from? What do I need in this moment? That kind of questioning turns emotional reaction into emotional intelligence. It's in that pause that leadership is born. Because when we can regulate ourselves, we earn the right to lead others. No one trusts a leader who's easily rattled. No one follows someone who is constantly emotionally hijacked. When you can stay grounded in the face of emotional intensity, yours or others, you become someone people can count on. You become an anchor, not a wave. But regulation doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you feel with awareness and respond with intention. Anger can become assertiveness, fear can become preparation, sadness can become compassion. Every emotion has a shadow side and a healthy side. Emotional regulation is the ability to shift from shadow to strength. There's also something profoundly healing about giving yourself permission to feel deeply without being overwhelmed by it. Emotions are energy. If they're not processed, they don't disappear. They linger. They find other ways to surface. through stress, health issues, fractured relationships, burnout. But when you take time to sit with emotion, name it, and understand it, you neutralize its chaos. You integrate its wisdom. The strongest minds are not the ones that never feel. They are the ones that feel deeply and choose wisely. That's what makes someone unshakable. Not that they never break, but that they've learned how to bend, how to breathe, how to reset. It's not a denial of emotion, it's a mastery of emotion. And mastery doesn't mean perfection. You'll still get triggered, still have moments of overwhelm, still lose your temper, but the difference is you recognize it faster, you recover more quickly, you learn from it. And over time, those moments become less frequent, less intense, less defining. At the heart of emotional regulation is the realization that you are not your emotions. You are the observer of them, the feeler of them, the steward of them, but not the victim of them. That shift in identity, from being controlled by emotion to being the container for it, changes everything. It gives you the power to choose your response, and in that choice, you reclaim your peace. Peace, however, is not something we only preserve in ourselves. It's something we learn to extend outward, especially when dealing with difficult people. There's a myth that says avoiding conflict is how you maintain peace. But avoidance is not peace, it's silence. And silence without understanding only breeds more division. The real test of emotional maturity is how we show up in the face of conflict. Do we defend ourselves at all costs? Do we attack to protect our ego? Or do we stay calm enough to listen, grounded enough to stay open, strong enough to speak truth without aggression? Difficult people are not always malicious. They're often wounded, fearful, operating from scarcity, pain, or unhealed stories. That doesn't excuse toxic behavior, but it can help us engage without matching the toxicity. When you understand that most aggression is fear in disguise, you begin to take things less personally. You realize that their behavior is a reflection of their inner state, not your worth. One of the most powerful practices in dealing with conflict is learning to respond rather than react. A reaction is immediate, emotional, and often defensive. A response is intentional, informed, and values-based. When you respond, you stay in control. You protect your integrity. You diffuse escalation. This doesn't mean tolerating abuse. It means learning to set boundaries with clarity and compassion. It means choosing firmness without hostility. It means being strong enough to walk away when peace requires distance, and being wise enough to stay engaged when peace can be built through conversation. True strength in conflict is not about dominance, it's about presence. The ability to stay rooted in your truth without needing to crush someone else. The ability to stay curious even when criticized. The ability to prioritize resolution over ego. When you lead this way, you often change the tone of the room, not because you demanded it, but because you modeled it. Not every conflict ends with mutual understanding. Not every difficult person changes. But the goal is not to change others. It's to stay aligned with your values in the face of challenge. That's what makes peace sustainable. It's not just built in quiet moments, it's tested in the heat of disagreement. People who've mastered this carry a different energy. They are not easily baited. They don't get pulled into drama. They don't waste time on every provocation. They choose their battles wisely. Speak intentionally, hold their center. And in doing so, they invite others to rise, not through force, but through example. In a broken world, this kind of presence is rare, but it's needed more than ever. People are exhausted from conflict, worn down by outrage, starving for clarity, compassion, and strength. And often, it only takes one person, One person willing to stay calm, to listen deeply, to respond thoughtfully, to shift the entire dynamic of a room. When you commit to emotional regulation and mindful engagement with conflict, you don't just protect your peace, you become a source of it. You create pockets of stability in unstable environments. You build trust where there was tension. You offer hope where there was hostility. And slowly, moment by moment, you become the kind of person the world doesn't just respect, but needs. Not because you shout the loudest, but because your calm speaks louder than chaos ever could.